Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us. I'm Wyatt Sharpe. Well, in January of 2025, this year, I went to the presidential inauguration, like a number of journalists, of course, did. And one of the people that I met and interviewed at the inauguration was Congressman George Santos, former Congressman George Santos. And one of the interesting things about him in that moment in particular was kind of the awkwardness of his presence, in the sense of he was no longer a congressman and he had not yet been sentenced. So really, he was just known as someone who did a lot of media interviews and someone who made cameo videos. That was essentially the essence of what George Santos was doing during that period. So I did the interview, but I didn't think much of it because, again, he was doing a lot of interviews. It was a cool moment for me. I got to hold him accountable, press him on a number of things, but also just learn more about him as a political figure. But then fast forward to when he was sentenced to, what was it, 7 years or so. And I, like any journalist, was trying to think whether or not I would have access to him when he was inside the prison. Would I be able to facilitate an interview? So I was messaging some of my sources who I knew would have access to him, even when he was in the prison. He was known for writing letters back and forth and such as well. And I didn't think much of it, and I really didn't try that hard because, frankly, we had seen what kind of played out. He made some comments going in. It would not have been that much of a story until President Donald Trump announced that he was commuting the sentence of George Santos and that he would be released. And all of a sudden, there was a story. And the story was, again, going back to some of the conversations that I was having with allies of George Santos, people were suspecting that the pardon or commutation would not happen until after the midterms because it would have been a political liability for Donald Trump. And so the fact that the president did this early on, I think, was not only a message to George Santos, but also a political message that Donald Trump felt as if there was some type of weaponization, as Republicans often like to talk about, with respect to George Santos. I had a number of questions, though, that I wanted to put to George Santos. So again, after the commutation was announced, it was, I think, Sunday night, and I texted him and I said, Congressman, glad to hear you're released. Can you do an interview? Just trying to make him agree to do an interview. And so he called me the next day. We did a telephone interview, and the very first question that I asked him was, given historically speaking, in judicial terms, accepting a commutation or a pardon is in fact often seen as an admission of guilt. Is this you saying that you are guilty? Take a look at what he had to say. Just how do you respond to critics who argue that the clemency itself kind of, historically speaking, often affirms guilt by accepting the plea without kind of like a full backing behind it, if you will?
So it's a very long question, but I've learned that you're a very diligent journalist, even though being so young and always very sharp. I'll say this to you, just so we'll dissect your question. I'm humbled to be home. I'm humbled for the second chance. I can change the ending of the book of my life, because you can never change the beginning, but I've been granted an opportunity to change what the ending looks like. And that ending, to me, to integrate, to go back, is to have purpose. And by purpose, I mean doing the right thing always. Whether it's going to be working with troubled youth to teach them the concepts of thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cheat, thou shalt not lie. Because if you do, bad things will happen to you like they happened to me. Or if it's going to be through prison reform to help create a more equitable justice system that actually rehabilitates prisoners and not make them angrier, which leads to recidivism. So I have options here, and that's what I want to focus on. I want a life of purpose. I don't want a life of political rhetoric. I don't want a life of chaos. I'm embarrassed at times when I look back now at some of the things I've said and done. And even statements and the anger that was in my body. That anger is a poison. I don't want that part of my life anymore. And as far as going back to my critics, look, everyone has critics. I understand my critics are going to be sharp. The only way I get my critics to see and to change their tone is through my actions. So it's going to be a lengthy process of not just rehabilitation for myself and reintegration, but to gain trust and rebuild my credibility, rebuild my reputation with my community, with my friends and families and my supporters, and also with my critics. It is very important that I am able to do that even with my critics. So it's a process that I am ready and already have started by doing these interviews and taking the time to address all these sensitive questions. Now, I will do whatever is required to me to do as the law goes, and I do want to address a lot of people use this really big figure of $300 and somewhat $1,000. The question at hand is, the answer to that question, pardon me, is 85% of this large number is an investment by the NRCC, which at the time the prosecutors decided that they would use it to inflate, saying that the money was invested in my campaign under false pretenses. I never actually touched the money. I just want to make this very clear. This was money that was spent on polling, TV ads, and on mailers on that the National Republican Congressional Committee does status quo practice for them to help their candidates who are polling ahead. And the purpose of that is because you are going to win, and that would help push you over the finish line. I did that. So when you look at that, and there's this 85% large chunk of this, pot of money to an organization which I did not defraud because I won the election for all intents and purposes, and the money wasn't misappropriated. It was actually managed by themselves. This was just part of the prosecutorial and weaponized nature of the Merrick Garland administration at the DOJ under President Biden. So again, I will do whatever is required of me of the law. My way of paying back society and of showing society I'm a new man is going to be by doing good, and by being a better person. And that why I'd love to continue to maintain contact and conversations with you so we can do these interviews so that you can follow the progress and show people and the world and your viewers and listeners that this is, in fact, what I am doing. And you can sort of keep up with George Santos in that fashion.
All right, that was former Congressman George Santos, and yet there was a lot of interesting things that was said in that relatively short interview. And one thing that I will say, regardless of, how wrong most of the things that he has done in his life are and how guilty he himself is, I do appreciate the fact that he, despite probably the countless amount of requests that he's been receiving from basically every journalist in the world, probably, I appreciate the fact that he made some time to chat with me and answer some of my questions as well.